Welcome to our annual Scholarship Awards ceremony. Thanks for joining us on this really rainy morning. I think the locals are probably pretty happy to see all this rain this morning. Before we start our essay readings, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rachel Olson, and I'm the Director of Education and Engagement here at the National Willa Cather Center, and I help coordinate the scholarship program. In fulfillment of our educational mission, the National Willa Cather Center is honored to administer 4 scholarship programs: the Norma Ross Walter Scholarship, Antonia Scholarship, Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner Scholarship, and the National Willa Cather Center Scholarship. Before we invite our scholarship winners to receive their awards, I would like to have a word about the supporters who make these awards possible. Norma Ross Walter was a Navy WAVE during the Second World War and a career newspaper editor in California. A lover of Cather and frequent visitor to Red Cloud, she was also a firm believer in education for young women. She left a bequest to the National Willa Cather Center to fund a scholarship program in perpetuity, and the first scholarship was awarded in 1987. Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner generously established 2 scholarship programs. She was the granddaughter of John and Anna Pavelka, prototypes for Anton and Antonia Shimerda in Cather's novel My Antonia. Antoinette spent decades telling Anna's story and supporting our organization's educational mission. The first Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner Scholarship, named in her honor, was awarded in 2013. And the Antonia Scholarship was awarded for the first time in 2018 as we celebrated the 100th publication anniversary of My Antonia. Antoinette's absence is felt today, but we're so glad her family is here to be part of this occasion. The National Willa Cather Center Scholarship, our newest scholarship, was established this year through voluntary contributions by our Board of Governors to support a graduate of the local high school. Cather herself was a graduate of Red Cloud High School. While she never returned to live here permanently after college, we hope recipients of this award will maintain a lifelong interest and appreciation for their hometown, just as Cather did. In total, our programs have enabled the Willa Cather Foundation to invest $203,000 for students who are furthering their education as English or history majors. To begin our presentation, please join me in welcoming a member of our Scholarship Selection Committee, Carol Duncan.
It is an honor to announce the 3 winners of the Norma Ross Walter Scholarship. Our first speaker will be the first place winner, Ella Gaskell. Ella is from Lincoln. She graduated from Lincoln Southeast High School. She will continue her education at Nebraska Wesleyan University. In her application, Ella wrote, "Sharing stories brings people closer together, shows us what we have in common while acknowledging and celebrating our differences, and teaches us to have empathy for those around us." Ella's essay, An Appreciation of Female Characters in My Antonia. Ella?
Okay, guess I just read this thing. Okay. While I was born and raised in Nebraska, I was never exposed to the work of Willa Cather in school. A few times it was suggested that I read one of her novels on my own, but I thought all of Cather's work to be pioneer stories, a subject which didn't interest me. I often lamented the lack of books that use Nebraska as their setting, barring those of historical nature. However, when I finally picked up My Antonia, I found my expectations subverted. Certainly, the story has to do with farmers and homesteads, but it is much more than a pioneer tale. I see the novel as a feminist work because despite being told through a young man's perspective, The pages are crowded with women. Each is their own person with their own dreams and personality, and not one fits the pretty, submissive stereotype. Even the homemakers and mothers, a staple of the book's time, are fleshed out, having both flaws and pleasant characteristics. For some, I found that the bad outweighed the good, but the titular character, to my delight, was the most complex of all. Overall, My Antonia shows impressive diversity in its characterization of women, which is a testament to Cather's skill. None of the women are perfect, and while I enjoyed that immensely, I took issue with Mrs. Chimerda's portrayal. She and her family are strangers to Jim Burden and his grandparents in the beginning, and immigrants on top of that. I understand that the elder Burden's attitudes toward foreigners are reflective of the time, but the way that Mrs. Chimerda is constantly criticized didn't sit right with me. She's initially described to have shrewd little eyes, and Mrs. Burden talks to her with veiled condescension in nearly every interaction. During a visit to their neighbor's modest sod house, the Burdens receive a cup of shavings from Mrs. Chimerda, which, unbeknownst to them, come from bohemian mushrooms. Jim's grandmother accepts the gift politely and cannot place the odd-smelling contents, so throws them in the fire after returning home. "I'm afraid of 'em," she tells Jim. "I shouldn't want to eat anything that has been shut up for months with old clothes and goose pillows." This remark wouldn't come off so severe if readers weren't told mere paragraphs before that Mrs. Burden had spent the whole ride home discussing how easily good Christian people could forget they were their brother's keepers. Her hypocrisy is aggravating, but not unrealistic compared to some women today. What stung most was seeing Jim, a preteen boy at this point, adopt this way of thinking, looking at himself as superior to his neighbors and always seeing the worst in Mrs. Chimerda. "She was a conceited, boastful old thing, and even misfortune could not humble her," he says after she makes a remark about the Burden family having more than her own. It's true that Mrs. Chimerda isn't always agreeable. She struggles as a homemaker on the prairie and can be stubborn and disapproving of new things, such as Antonia learning English. However, these unfortunate qualities are highlighted to such a degree that there is no room for her to be anything else. The majority of the novel's other important females were allowed layered personalities, so it was disappointing that Mrs. Chimerda wasn't extended the same courtesy. Still, My Antonia is a wonderful showcase of women from a variety of circumstances. The Hired Girls was the section I most enjoyed due to its array of female characters, in direct contrast to the male-heavy cast of Book 1. The town of Blackhawk is full of strong, independent women, including Frances Harling, Tiny Soderball, and, of course, Lena Lingard. Her bond with Jim grows throughout the novel, and while their connection deepens into romance for a period, they do not wind up married at the end. In fact, Lena's disinterest in marriage is a belief she sticks to her entire life. "I've seen a great deal of married life, and I don't care for it," she states the first time we meet her. I was skeptical of this for a while, knowing how it usually turns out untrue for women in classic novels. But with Antonia being published at the turn of the century, it seems there was more room for unmarried women in literature. Lena is never saddled with a husband or kids. Instead, she opens a successful dress shop and buys her mother a house. I love that after spending the majority of her early life caring for younger siblings, Lena got to pursue a career she wanted in adulthood, as well as enjoy a bit of romance. Interesting, too, is the way Jim's assessments of women changed through time spent with Lena and the other hired girls. Even though he admits to being puzzled by Lena's success in business, he doesn't deny her great natural aptitude for her work. He later tells her Polish neighbor that a girl who makes her own living can ask a college boy to supper without being talked about, in response to concern about Lena being compromised. Jim has grown into a respectable young man who understands that he may not always get what he wants. He tries once to change Lena's mind about marriage, but she is steadfast in her beliefs. "You can't tell me anything about family life. I've had plenty to last me," she says, and he accepts that answer. They amicably part ways, remaining friends till the end of the story. One thing that particularly shines about the novel's female characters is their ability to befriend the male protagonist without the relationship completely devolving into romance. Like Lena, Antonia starts out simply as Jim's friend. Their dynamic is as complicated as Tony's character. She has many qualities that separate her from typical women, but it takes Jim, and thus readers, a long time to appreciate them. After Mr. Chimerda's death, when Antonia begins working in the fields and refuses to go to school, Jim laments that she has lost all her nice ways. He and his grandmother both think that farm work is unbecoming of a young girl. Tony, meanwhile, doesn't let other people's opinions dissuade her from helping her family, telling Jim, "I like to be like a man." Once Antonia is hired by the Harlings, Jim praises what he once loathed, including her strong, independent nature and her love for rough play and digging in the earth. If she fits in with other ladies, he has nothing but compliments to give her. His feelings are often hard to understand. He cares for Antonia deeply, but is critical of her and has a tendency to blame her for circumstances beyond her control, just as he did with her mother. "I could not forgive her for becoming an object of pity," he says after learning of Tony's pregnancy out of wedlock, and draws comparisons between her and Lena Lingard, seeing the latter as a troublemaker who did well for herself, but the former as a good girl led astray. I enjoyed seeing Antonia maintain her own personality and beliefs in spite of Jim's many complaints. His views might mold the beginnings of audience opinions about Antonia, but we ultimately get to look at her in our own way. In my modern-day eyes, Tony's journey into single motherhood is admirable and inspiring. She means it when she says, "I'm going to see that my little girl has a better chance than I ever had." And she doesn't need to marry Jim to fulfill that promise. Cather made the right choice in choosing to never make the pair a true couple. Jim is so easily displeased that they wouldn't have worked well together. In the end, we see Antonia in her element as a mother and wife. She's no longer conventionally beautiful, having lost a lot of teeth, but her children adore her, and she found a good husband who shares her background. Bohemian heritage is alive in the Cusack house, a detail that I, as a Nebraskan with Czech roots, took great joy in. "I know so many women who have kept all the things that she had lost, but whose inner glow has faded," Jim says when he visits her as an adult. And it's nice to know that though Tony has lost much, including her home in Europe, she managed to get a little piece of it back. Despite her hardships, she got to live out the rest of her life in contentment and pass her history on to the next generation. She will live on and be celebrated, just as Cather is for my Antonia. The novel is worthy of literary praise for many reasons, especially its depictions of female characters. Whether they connect with Lena Lingard, Antonia, Mrs. Shimerda, or someone else, women can see themselves in this book. Although not all of them are written perfectly, these characters prove that women don't have to be what men expect of them. We can make our own way in the world, each of us following her own road of destiny, and it is up to us how we want our lives to look. Maybe that's running a business, or raising 10 kids, or becoming a famous author. No matter what, it's our life, and we get to live it.
Ella, Becca, I'd like to present you the first place scholarship certificate and a copy of my Antonia and Leanna scholarship. Thank you. Congratulations. Our second place winner is Ava Hoschneider. Ava is from Lincoln. She graduated from Pius X High School. She plans to attend Wayne State College this fall. Of her future career as a teacher, Ava said, "I firmly believe that the ability to interpret literature is key to a high-achieving life." Ava's essay reading, "The Short Works of Willa Cather."
As a high school senior in the state of Nebraska, the works of Willa Cather have been a part of the curriculum I have learned from for several years. It has been a privilege to read the works of Willa Cather as I have progressed through my junior high and high school years, and I can confidently say that my education in the subjects of English and literature would not feel complete without the presence of Cather's stories. As a junior in high school, I was fortunate to explore a new part of Cather's work that I never had before, her short stories. From this American literature class my junior year to my own personal reading endeavors, I have come to greatly enjoy Cather's short stories, such as Neighbor Rosicki, A Wagner Matinee, and Paul's Case. Neighbor Rosicki is the first work that comes to my mind when one mentions the short works of Willa Cather. The most impressive aspect of this work, in my eyes, is the character of Rosicki and how Cather paints such a clear portrait in my mind of who he is. Even from the very beginning of the story, it seems like I have met him. Cather makes his character clear to the audience immediately when Dr. Burleigh tells Rosicki, "You're 65 years old, and you've always worked hard, and your heart's tired. You've got to be more careful from now on, and you can't do heavy work anymore." When I first read this line, I was so impressed by the way Cather depicts the man that is Rosicki. Based on this description alone, I can picture an old, but not exactly elderly, farmer who has simply poured his heart into his life's work. Even in my corner of Nebraska, there are countless farmers I am related to who would act just the same as Rosicki in a situation such as this. Cather was aware of all farmers unwilling to retire, and so brilliantly characterized Rosicki in this way, providing a relatable character to Nebraskan readers. This I find genius, and yet another reason to be impressed by Cather's writing. It is no secret that Cather's written accounts of the Nebraska frontier have earned her a perpetual place alongside the very best of Nebraskan and American authors. After having read Neighbor Rosicki, however, there is something about her descriptions of Rosicki that give me a completely new appreciation for who she is as a Nebraskan author. Not only is her talent for describing Nebraska's landscape a remarkable aspect of her portfolio, but through Neighbor Rosicki, describing the people of Nebraska is as well. I find it astonishing the way Cather incorporates charming descriptions of both the state and its people in Neighbor Rosicki, and how she is seamlessly able to connect the two on paper. I greatly enjoy the description given of Rosicki and the land when he finishes errands and rattled out of town and along the highway through a wonderfully rich stretch of country, the finest farms in the county. He admired this high prairie and always liked to drive through it. This love of the land that Cather describes, along with the description of Rosicki's love for the Nebraska countryside, is something I find so impressive about her writing style. The succinct but striking language Cather uses sums up Nebraska and its farmers in such a beautiful and fitting way. The farmers I have the pleasure of knowing are just the same as Rosicki in this scene. They love the land they farm, and they could never tire of it. The words that Cather uses to connect Nebraskans and the land are one of the most intriguing aspects of her writing, in my opinion. A Wagner Matinee is a Cather short story that I find excellently endearing due to the themes that Cather explores through the words of the piece. While family is a clear concept in this short story that I absolutely value, the theme in A Wagner Matinee that intrigues me the most is the idea of acknowledging the sacrifices of the previous generation. While enjoying lovely music, Clark notices his Aunt Georgiana's swollen and worn hands. He continues and says, "As I pressed and gently quieted one of those hands, I remembered, with quivering eyelids, their services for me in other days." The impression this scene leaves is unmatched. I genuinely appreciate the time Cather takes to build up these words in the text. Yes, Clark taking his elderly aunt to a concert is a thoughtful gesture and surely leaves an impact on both of them. But the realization Clark has is truly what displays the theme of properly serving and appreciating the past generation. I find it beautiful that Cather structured the text to parallel itself during the concert. I love how this placement of language draws out the grateful nostalgia that both Aunt Georgiana and Clark experienced during this event. This style of writing effectively displays the differences between the sentiments that Clark and his aunt feel, and I find that moving. I am drawn in by the way that Aunt Georgiana's nostalgia is described when Clark tells the audience. Her fingers worked mechanically upon her black dress, as though of themselves they were recalling the piano score they had once played. It is beautiful that the older of the two, Aunt Georgiana, is filled with the music that she once played and enjoys it quietly by herself. I love how Cather allows this character to reminisce and enjoy this moment in isolation, truly emphasizing to the audience that she has earned this quiet moment with no one other than herself. Clark, on the other hand, begins to understand his aunt as he observes her hands and remembering the past. When Clark chooses to involve Aunt Georgiana in the memories that are coming back to him, she makes a point in the importance of the young learning from the old. I am humbled by the parallels Cather makes between Aunt Georgiana and Clark in A Wagner Matinee, as well as the differences the audience gets to see because of the way Aunt Georgiana and Clark's experiences contrast and then come together. Finally, Paul's Case is a short story of Cather's that I find heartbreaking but intriguing nonetheless. I think the characterization of Paul provides the reader with an in-depth understanding of his personality. Similar to the title character in Neighbor Rosicki, Cather illustrates Paul in a descriptive way that makes me feel as though Paul is someone I know personally. However, there is a difference in characterization that is worth noting. Rosicki is a character I feel resembles a grandparent of mine, while Cather is a character I would consider a peer. I do not relate to Rosicki, but I do find bits of the sentiments of my generation coinciding with Paul's thoughts. This could simply be due to age, but I find that the language Cather uses to describe Paul gives me the feeling that he could be a boy in my class. The first description the audience is given about Paul truly sets him apart when the narrator says, "Paul entered the faculty room suave and smiling. There was something of the dandy about him." This light-hearted, boyish description of Paul makes me smile each time I read it. This playful, simple language Cather uses fittingly starts off the story on the right foot and appeals to her younger audience by reminding them of their peers. I think the choice Cather makes to begin the story with this description is brilliant and highly effective. When I read this story for the first time, I was unexpectedly surprised by the ending. Upon reflection of why the shock value of Paul's suicide does not decrease with each reading of the text, I have concluded that the format of the story is the reason the ending remains so effective. I think Cather's decision in making the actual climax of the story brief and abrupt at the end leaves the audience contemplating the finality of death. I find Cather's detailed depiction of Paul's life, ending in a quick paragraph about his death, causes a deep, personal reaction from the audience. Cather's choice with the structure of Paul's case emphasizes how suddenly death can come after such a young and seemingly invincible life, which I find completely breathtaking. Contemplating these short stories of Willa Cather has enhanced my literary appreciation of detailed characterization and storytelling. Through Neighbor Rosicki, A Wagner Matinee, and Paul's Case, Cather comprehensively describes characters the audience feels they know, experiences the audience can almost touch, and realizations the audience has never pondered before. The language Cather uses to convey her stories has become an irreplaceable component of the literature from which I have learned. Through her writing, Cather has become an inspiring example to many, and it is a gift to be able to read her work, especially as a Nebraskan.
Okay, Ava is receiving a certificate for the second place winner of the Norma Ross Walter Scholarship and the scholarly edition of Youth and the Bright Medusa. Our third place winner today is Trinity Hoshin. She is a Minden High graduate and lives in Minden. She is enrolled in Concordia University. Trinity says she is a lover of the classics and often feels like a girl living in the wrong time. Take me back to a time when reading and writing were treasured more. Trinity's essay that she will be reading is Neighbor Rosicki.
Willa Cather's Neighbor Rosicki takes a different approach compared to O Pioneers, which is another book that I read during my senior year. In Neighbor Rosicki, I noticed the skillful development of the characters to be the central point and the land to be a close second, while the land was highlighted repeatedly in O Pioneers. Although both perspectives are interesting, I discovered that the growth of the characters in Neighbor Rosicki intrigued me, and I noticed deeper details upon a more thorough reading. Neighbor Rosicki highlights many forgotten truths and teaches invaluable life lessons by allowing me to learn with the characters and experience their pains and joys alike. The first graveyard scene, told from the perspective of Anton Rosicki, is remarkable in that it gave me a glimpse of the character's impressive contentment in his appreciation of small things in life. It was a nice graveyard, Rosicki reflected, sort of snug and homelike, not cramped or mournful, a big sweep all around it. In this excerpt, the author immediately shows me that Rosicki is not an ordinary person. It gave me the impression that something in Rosicki's background formed him into the person he is, and invoked a sense of wonder at his apparent peacefulness with his lot in life. I was anxious to discover this backstory. The snow, falling over his barnyard and graveyard, seemed to draw things together like. This statement appears relatively odd at first glance, but upon deeper reflection, I was able to discern how at peace Rosicki felt about the fleetfulness of life and the inevitability of death. I was amazed at how the character of Razuki was developed in just a few lines. The second graveyard scene, related by Dr. Ed Burleigh after the death of Razuki, revealed the thinking behind Anton Razuki's thoughts and comments about the graveyard early in the story. Nothing could be more undeathlike than this place. Nothing could be more right for a man who had helped to do the work of great cities and had always longed for the open country and had got it at last. In my opinion, this scene and Dr. Ed's musings about the story of Anton Razuki come full circle. They called into my recollection the tale of Razuki's past experiences and highlighted how they formed him into the man he was remembered as by family and friends. For the first time, it struck Dr. Ed that this was really a beautiful graveyard. This excerpt struck me hard because graveyards are rarely referred to as beautiful. I translated the reasoning behind Anton's peacefulness and death as the assurance that he will truly remain free. Cities of the dead, indeed, cities of the forgotten, of the put away. But this was open and free, this little square of long grass, which the wind forever stirred. I recognize this expert as significant because it illustrated why Anton preferred the countryside. In the city, he enjoyed life, but eventually felt trapped due to the bonds of poverty and lack of education. However, Anton found freedom from these restrictions in his seemingly simple countryside life. Polly, the wife of Razuki's son Rudolph, is mentioned briefly by Dr. Ed at the beginning of the story. At first, her character seemed relatively ordinary and boring to me, but I soon realized that this was the farthest from the truth. Polly's character was masterfully developed throughout the story. I gained more insight as to the reasons behind the way she originally portrayed herself as the story unfolded. And how's Polly? I was afraid Mary mightn't like an American daughter-in-law, but it seems to be working out all right. The first thing that struck me about Polly was her marriage to a foreign man despite her American roots. The second thing that puzzled me was Razuki's apparent love of the young woman. Upon reading more of the story, I discovered it was rare for young people of different ethnicities to wed. She never called him father or married mother. She was sensitive about having married a foreigner. My first impression of Polly is that she seems oddly ill at ease with her in-laws, and that she is resolved to maintain a cold disposition towards them. I came to the conclusion that this indifference stemmed from fear. Molly was afraid of being unusual or conspicuous in any way, of being ordinary, as she said. I personally can relate to this fear of what other people think of me. Polly was afraid of being judged by others, so I think she resolved to keep her distance from her new in-laws. Polly remembered that hour long afterwards. It had been like an awakening to her. It brought her to herself. It communicated some direct and untranslatable message. It appeared to me that the unfailing love with which Razuki had always treated Polly finally opened her eyes to what truly mattered in life. I think that awakening was the realization that what others perceive to be true of you does not matter. The important thing in life is to fiercely love without being hampered by fear of how other people will perceive or judge you. Polly's character grew exponentially throughout the story as she learned one of the most valuable life lessons. The character of Anton Razuki is intriguing from the very beginning. Razuki's face had the habit of looking interested, suggested a contented disposition, and a reflective quality that was gay rather than grave. To me, Razuki was a sort of puzzle that I couldn't wait to solve. The way he conducted himself seemed different than all the other characters. She admired the way he never, under any circumstances, raised his voice or spoke roughly. I think it shows greatly the effect Razuki had on others, even with his wife. Another thing that really made Razuki's character so strong was the manner in which his backstory was related. I enjoyed reading Anton's past as told from his own perspective. As his tale is told piece by piece throughout the story, I felt like I was discovering more about Razuki and why he was the man he was. Razuki thought he wanted to live like that forever. As I read through Anton's adventures in New York, it struck me that it was just as relatable in that day as it is today. Everyone goes through seasons in life when they are perfectly content for a while, but then feel as if there is something missing. But as the years passed, all alike, he began to get a little restless. There's not anything wrong with feeling restless in life. When the grass turned green in Park Place, and the lilac hedge at the back of Trinity Churchyard put out its blooms, he was tormented by a longing to run away. Although he wanted to run away, Rozicki stayed in New York for a while until a seemingly miraculous door was opened to travel west. To me, this symbolized one of the hardest life lessons, which is to remain content where you are and do not impatiently chase after an escape. When you remain content in troubled times, an opportunity will come and hit you out of nowhere. He stayed with them until he was 12 and formed those ties with the earth and the farm animals and growing things which are never made at all unless they are made early. I loved how Rozicki's connection to the country was portrayed. This excerpt showed me why Anton felt such a deep tie to the country. To be a landless man was to be a wage earner, a slave, all your life, to have nothing, to be nothing. I realized the reason that Anton desired to remain in the country was because it was freedom to him. He didn't much need an apprentice, but he was sorry for the boy and took him in for no wages but his keep and what he could pick up. To me, this unfolded the reason why Anton loved so hard. As he grew, Rozicki understood more about the situation of his London tenants. Rozicki knew she often went empty to give another potato to the two hungry, sad-eyed boys who lodged with her. Rozicki saw and experienced the love of this poor woman at a young age, and it impacted the way he himself loved others for the rest of his life. It was as if Rozicki had a special gift for loving people, something that was like an ear for music or an eye for color. It was quiet, unobtrusive. It was merely there. You saw it in his eyes. Perhaps that was why they were merry. You felt it in his hands too. I thought this excerpt was powerful because it illustrates how other people recognize the love Anton had for everyone. Overall, Willa Cather's neighbor Rozicki is a perfect example of how the true selfless love of one person can influence many around them. I believe that this cannot be emphasized enough even today. That kind of love is rare, but it can change people's lives. Rozicki's utter contentment and appreciation for the simple things in life is something that can be obtained through intentional daily practice. As I read this story, I was impressed at how Rozicki seemed to stop short and take the time from a busy day to enjoy the nature around him. People notice that kind of joy and love, and it invokes a sense of wonder. Rozicki was not afraid of death, because he viewed it simply as another form of freedom, not a prison. Rozicki's love and gentle disposition inspires others to strive to obtain the same calm joy in life.
Trinity, we would like to present to you the certificate for third place in the Norma Ross Walter Scholarship and also a scholarly edition of Obscure Destinies. Congratulations.
All right, thank you, Carol, for helping us introduce and welcome our scholarship winners. Carol and her daughter are themselves Norma Ross Walter winners. Oh, you're here.
Yeah, right?
I was just thanking you for joining us. It looks like our next speaker isn't quite here yet, so if it's all right, I will take over the podium for just a minute. Maybe we'll give her a little bit of time. While we're transitioning to our next scholarship winner, I do want to mention that the University of Nebraska very generously provides the scholarly editions for our scholarship winners every year. So thank you to them for supporting our scholarship program. Our new National Willa Cather Center Scholarship that launched this year, our winner was Brooks Armstrong. And Brooks was unable to attend today because of a previously scheduled obligation. But Brooks is he's a graduate of Red Cloud High School this year. He was #1 in his class. He was the valedictorian. He is going to attend the University of Nebraska in Lincoln and major in ag engineering. And he wrote a little bit about his kind of time here as a kid growing up in Red Cloud with Willa Cather's legacy in the background. And just really quick little snippet of what he wrote. He says, it's a very serene place, the National Willa Cather Prairie, to see the untouched waves of grass, just as Willa Cather described in her novels. And seeing the heartland as it was originally found is a meaningful experience, as well as visiting her childhood home. It's a great place to witness the scenes that seem to be untouched since the days of Willa Cather. So congratulations to Brooks on his achievements and being our first National Willa Cather Center Scholarship winner. And now I also wanted to mention our Antonia Scholarship winner was unable to be here today as well, and her name is Campbell Collins, and she's actually, she resides in Austin, Texas, and was unable to travel today. Campbell received a perfect score on her SATs, excuse me, so quite a student, and she will attend Hillsdale College this fall. I asked Campbell to record her essay so people could watch it on our conference app, Whova. So there is a video recording in the agenda for this event, and you can listen to her essay, which is entitled Beautiful Talk, Language and Belonging in My Antonia. So it's a great essay, and Campbell will also receive a scholarly edition of My Antonia. So. And now I see that one of our special speakers has arrived. Anna, would you like to come up here and join us, or would you like to say some words after our scholarly reading? Okay, perfect. Well, then I'll introduce you to our Antoinette Willis Scupa Turner Scholarship winner. Her name is Autumn Wissenberg, and Autumn is from Milford and graduated from Milford High School. And she will attend Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota this fall. Autumn is described by her English teacher as having a thirst for knowledge, genuine writing ability, and the ability to tackle difficult concepts through the written word, which as a former English teacher, I can't think of anything more I would love to see and experience from my writing students. So with that, Autumn will read her essay called Humanity on a Page.
Growing up, when I read stories, they always took place in big cities or outlying suburbs. The kids could walk anywhere they pleased, and the only weight on their shoulders was the next day's homework. I rarely saw myself in books, but I also rarely saw my family. Neighbor Rosaki, however, let me see myself and my ancestors in the pages. Throughout the simple but touching story, 3 aspects really stood out to me and impressed me as a rural farm kid. Rosaki's character, the relationships between characters, and most of all, the setting. Neighbor Rosaki's setting is one aspect of the story that I especially admired. It's not very often I read a story that takes place in Nebraska or even the Midwest in general. And even when a story did feature the Flatwater State, the description was hardly romantic. But Cather found a way to describe the beauty of Nebraska in her stories, not only through the physical appearance of the place, but through the people as well. With her heartwarming descriptions of the gentle hill slope and rows of pale gold corn stalks, Cather brings color to a state that is often seen as bland and dull. Rosaki was right when he said, the fine snow settling into his red grass and upon the few little evergreens and the headstones looked very pretty. When people describe Nebraska, they often assume the state is just a bunch of corn, plain and boring with nothing to see. It's refreshing to see my home described with a more colorful palette. The people in the story also play a part in giving the state its charming appeal. The Rosaki family provides the greatest example. No matter the situation, the children are always out and ready to help put away the horses, hang a coat, and set the table for a guest. Like true Nebraskans, they share their home with others, no matter how short the notice. Throughout the story, Cather truly brought Nebraska to life, and in my opinion did a beautiful job at showcasing the kindness and wonder of the state. Cather also did a phenomenal job at showing the less attractive sides of the state. While she never held back on her loving descriptions of the plains, she also never strayed from information about dry summers and winters, poor years for farmers, and dusty winds. She not only brought to life the beauty of Nebraska, but its less attractive traits as well. What really caught my attention when I first started reading, though, was Rosicki. Not all that surprising considering he is the protagonist. But his role in the story isn't what drew me to him. No, what made me fond of the man was his uncanny similarities to my own grandfathers. Both sides of my family are full of farmers. Both of my grandpas have farmed their entire lives, so it felt very comforting to read a story about someone like them. Throughout the story, Rosicki is very kind and down to earth, similar to my grandfather on my dad's side. Not once did Rosicki want anything more than have enough to get by. Rosicki only longed for a simple, happy life. He had no desire to hurry through life, not to be always skimping and saving. He never longed for riches or miles of land with top-notch equipment. Mary says the couple would much rather put some color to my children's faces than put money into the bank. My grandpa Wissenberg was never concerned with buying more land. His only goal was to have good enough land that he could pass it down to his children when he was gone. Rosicki's gentleness also greatly resembled my grandfather's. Cather says there wasn't anything brutal in the short, broad-backed man with the three-cornered eyes and the forehead that went on to the top of his skull. And at this moment, I couldn't help but think of Grandpa Wissenberg. I have heard that man raise his voice less than 5 times in my 17 years of living, and I thought if there's a single sentence that could describe my grandpa, this would be it. Often when farmers are portrayed in stories, they're strict and stern, and while that description sure fit my father and Grandpa Lorenz, Anton Rosicki felt like Grandpa Wissenberg. It was refreshing to read a story about an old farmer that wasn't a strict, stubborn, and angry soul. When he offered to wash dishes for Polly so she and Rudolph could go on a date, it reminded me of Grandpa Wissenberg offering me money so I wouldn't have to stress about income. Grandpa Lorenz has never hesitated to offer us a ride to a sporting event or school when we needed it either. When Mary said he had never touched her without gentleness, an image of my Grandpa Wissenberg flashed through my mind, and suddenly something felt different about the story. I've read a lot of stories and a lot of books, but never have I met a character that felt so human, both by themselves and with others. I think that's the defining feature in Cather's work. Anton Rosicki feels like someone I know. He feels like someone in my church, an older man who comes to watch the annual musical, and just a friendly stranger I meet at the concession stand. It takes a special kind of skill to make a character feel like more than just a few words on a page or a name on a screen, and Cather clearly possesses this skill. In both his solo scenes and his conversations with others, Rosicki feels like he could almost step off the page. At certain points, it feels as if he's reading the story over your shoulder with you, adding little remarks along the way. When he stops at the cemetery to just enjoy the view, I find it to be such a human moment. Who hasn't stopped to just watch the first snow fall? However, to me, his interactions with his family bring out his humanity and caring nature the most. When he comes back from the doctor, for example, he immediately begins brainstorming ideas on how to help the family without doing farm work, such as how he wanted to build a closet in the boys' room and make them 2 little fellers keep their clothes hung up. Not only did he care for his family through these types of gestures, but he never abused his power or seemed to enforce his role as head of the house. Before he took the car down to Polly and Rudolph's to let them have a little date night, he ran the idea by his other sons to make sure they were okay with it. He didn't want them to feel less important, but he still wanted to be able to help Polly feel better. Polly and Rosicki's relationship is something very special, I'd say. In the beginning of the story, we only know that Polly is Rudolph's American wife, who isn't a born and raised farm girl. Throughout the story, though, we come to learn more about Polly's current state of emotion. She is anxious and unsure, and she needs something to lean on. Rosicki becomes that person fairly on. At the very beginning of the story, when Dr. Ed is telling Rosicki to take it easy and help his wife in the kitchen, Rosicki says, "I don't like no old man hanging around the kitchen too much." But not long after, he willingly lands himself in the kitchen to finish dishes for Polly, so she and Rudolph can enjoy a night alone, together. He does this all to let Polly have a night of relaxation, comfort, and familiarity. This relationship is really what brings Rosicki's character to life. Neighbor Rosicki is a story that impressed me in numerous ways. Its description of scenery, characters, emotions, and more made the story feel more like a memory from a past life than something I was reading on a screen. However, in the end, what stood out to me and impressed me the most was absolutely the way Cather romanticized rural Nebraska life, while also being realistic about what it entails, and Rosaki's character and how utterly human he is. Both by himself and with his interactions with others, he seems to step off the page and read the story with you. Cather overall has wrote a story that is alive, a story that feels more like a memory than an army of paragraphs on a page.
Thank you, Autumn. And now Anna Taylor, Antoinette Turner's granddaughter, would like to say a few words, and then she'll present Autumn with her book and certificate.
It is such an honor to be here in my grandma Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner's stead. These corals were given to my grandma Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner, whose middle name was named after Willa because Willa had an invitation to the wedding of my grandma's parents, Julia and Johnny Scupa. But Willa wasn't able to come, but then when they named their daughter, my grandma Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner, then Willa sent these corals from New York City. And my grandma would tell the story that like she was a little farm girl growing up south of Camel, Nebraska, which is a couple miles west of here, and that she just felt so pretty when she would put those on, these corals that Willa gave her on, but she was, her mom was scared that she was going to break them because she was just a youngster, and she wore out the celluloid box, Grandma did, like opening and closing the box to look at the pearls and get them out. And like the clasp has been like redone a couple times, or at least once anyway. And so it's a real treasure. But so Grandma Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner, she was the granddaughter of my Antonia, Anna Pavelka. So like Anna was a real person, and you can visit the Pavelka farmstead where Anna and her husband John lived. And John is the prototype for Cather's short story neighbor Rozaki, whom Autumn wrote about. And so Willa would come out and she would visit Anna and John out at the Pavelka farmstead. And part of that visit is at the end of the book too. So anyway, like I grew up like I did not know Anna Pavelka or Antonia or John, neighbor Rozaki, but I knew my grandma Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner very well, and I think the staff here in Red Cloud also knew her very well, and she was a very, very special lady, and she passed away in 2021 at the age of 101. But Grandma Turner, she was a visionary, and she realized what a treasure that she had in giving the real life version of her grandmother, Antonia, to audiences. And she was living history. She made the character come alive. Grandma actually embodied Antonia herself. I think she was like a living Antonia, and Grandma always said, "I've got my, my grandmother's genes," I think, and so Grandma went all over the state and to other states and talked about her grandmother Antonia to especially young people, because Grandma always had such a heart for like telling the younger people, like, you have a story, you have a heritage, you have something, special. Willa wrote about, our family, but every family, has a story. And so she just really brought that out and encouraged people to do that. And it paid off in the way that she really instilled that in me, and I'm so proud and thankful and just glad to be able to continue that legacy. Talk about hard shoes to fill, but just so thankful to be able to just be here and be able to present these scholarships, because again, like Grandma, being someone who was always looking to the future and planning and thinking, she would like stay up nights just thinking about something until she came to a conclusion, and then she would burst out in the kitchen and she'd be like, "I think we need to do this and this and this and this," and so we miss her, but she was truly a wonderful lady, and just a wonderful grandma, and she actually had a book written about her too. I think there's still some in the bookstore. It's called A Treasure Called Tony. Tony was Antoinette's nickname, and it just talks about her life, how she grew up like her grandmother on the prairie, and didn't know any English, just spoke Czech, and went to country school, and lived through the Great Depression, and ate lard sandwiches, and just appreciated everything. Had a gratitude for life and for just blessings. I don't think I can even come close to fathoming that, but just really a remarkable lady. And so anyway, so she passed the baton, passed the necklace on to me, to be able to present the scholarships to there's one scholarship, the Antonia Scholarship, that was the first one, and then the Antoinette Willa Scupa Turner Scholarship, and that was the second one that she established. And it was, again, to continue to have young people like read about like her family, and just be interested in their be interested in their own families. So anyway, with that, just yes.
Go. Autumn, if you'd like to come up and. Thank you so much, Anna. And to all of our scholarship winners, I think we have just a few minutes for a couple of brief questions. So if you have a question you'd like to raise your hand, Nolan, our staff member, will come and give you a card. And to kind of get that ball rolling, I'll pose a question that all of our winners can answer. Last night, we had a speaker that ended up talking a little bit about whether or not people that are from this area, people that grow up in the Great Plains or grasslands, are still misunderstood. And I think Willa Cather wrote a lot about sort of the identity of homesteaders, immigrants on the prairie, Nebraskans. And so I think after reading your essays, all of you are equipped to answer this question, which is, do you still feel like rural Nebraskans or Great Plains residents are misunderstood? And do you think Cather helps people understand better?
Well, I definitely think Cather helps people understand a great deal better. I think even from fellow Nebraskans almost, the idea of staying in Nebraska is like, why would you ever do that? Why would you ever want to stay in Nebraska after college? That's really weird. Like after you don't have to pay in-state tuition, that's really odd that you would stay here. And so I think in that sense, yes, I think a little bit misunderstood of why would you ever want to stay where there's nothing, but there's not nothing.
Anyone else want to tackle that? All right, Ava, you have the final word on Nebraska identity here at the Red Cloud Opera House. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, well I have, oh, yes ma'am.
There we go. I wrote my college essay about the book that I'm writing, and how my whole goal as a writer is to increase representation in literature. Especially growing up, I didn't really see myself in stories, and so I just wrote about me writing the story that I finally get to see myself, and how someday I want there to be enough books that another little girl won't feel the same way.
Okay, Chuck, but one question. Okay, go for it.
I think, Ava, you talked about how in high school you had read a number of stories. So this isn't for you. Everybody else has done it. The rest of you, were you actually assigned Cather works in high school, or was this something you saw the scholarship opportunity and so forth and said, okay, I've got to write about this? I'm just curious how much Nebraska high school students are exposed to Cather at high school level. Clearly you were, some, but just about the others.
I read O Pioneers during my senior year. It was assigned as a class, but then when I saw the scholarship, I decided I wanted to do a little bit more reading on my own. So then I just read the short works of Willa Cather's.
I never did, as I put in the essay. My dad one time was like, hey, you should read some Willa Cather. And at the time I was like, no, why would I do that? And well, then I found out about the scholarship and read my Antonia, and here we are. So thanks, Dad. Good suggestion. Didn't take it.
Well, I hope this scholarship opportunity and your reading experiences thus far encourage you to read some more Willa Cather work. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No.
I originally found the Willa Cather scholarships just by looking up Nebraska scholarships, but I did read my Antonia for our college English class, which my teacher did have in her classroom. So I assume it used to be part of our curriculum. but wasn't our classroom, so yeah.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And if you are a scholarship recipient or a family member of a scholarship recipient or a family member of a person who created a scholarship, I invite you to please join me in the lobby for some photographs. Thank you so much for coming this morning. Our next event is at 10:30. There is a paper session here in the Opera House. And there's also a 10:30 session at the Auld Public Library, just about a block down the street. And those details are in your programs. So thank you so much.